It's been almost 3 years since the Final Fantasy VII Remake was released. Selling 3.5 million copies within its first 3 days on sale, it became one of the fastest selling PlayStation 4 exclusives ever released. And this milestone was followed up by the news that it had managed to sell another 1.5 million copies over the next 4 months. Since then, Square Enix has been tight-lipped on official sales figures. All we know is that the Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade Edition has sold just under 40,000 copies in Japan since its release in mid-2021, and the Steam integration of Intergrade has sold approximately 500,000 copies worldwide since its release in mid-2022. Based on this, it's unclear where the Final Fantasy VII Remake stands in the pecking order in terms of comparing to sales of previous games, but one thing is clear: there's still a ton of interest about the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, and in that regard, all eyes are focused on Part 2, which has been dubbed Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. To date, Square Enix has been quite guarded about what we can expect within the second installment of this mini-franchise, but throughout this video, we're going to employ our typical granular style to compile every morsel of information we've found about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So strap yourselves in, as it's time to get investigative, as we start off with staff changes before exploring production and gameplay elements and finishing off with some talk about the potential release date. Ever since the Final Fantasy VII Remake was a known entity, Square Enix has been keen to highlight the involvement of prominent staff members associated with the original game. Amongst this group were Yoshinori Kitase, Tetsuya Nomura, Kazushige Nojima, Motomo Toriyama, and of course Nobuo Uematsu. But they would also be joined by the likes of Shintaro Tokai, Hidekazu Miyake, Kazuyuki Ikamori, Masashi Hamauzu, and Kenzo Kanzakai. They each played roles in producing that original game, and for the 7 Remake, they returned in more senior roles to ensure the development process had that blend of experience and youth. That mantra could even be seen within the leadership team, as it wasn't just composed of veterans who started their careers well before the merger with Enix. Naoki Hamaguchi, for example, who had been leading the charge on Mobius alongside Motomo Toriyama, would be promoted to co-director partway through development, and he would be tasked with overseeing aspects of the game relating to game design and programming. Another senior position, Battle Director, was filled by an external hire. It saw Teruki Endo leave Capcom, where he had served as a prominent part of the Monster Hunter team, even fulfilling the role of lead game designer on the wildly successful Monster Hunter world. Other positions, such as lead battle programmer and lighting director, would then be filled by Satoru Koyama and Ichiro Yamaguchi, both of whom joined the company during the Square Enix era. For Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it's assumed many of these individuals will return in the same roles. However, one prominent change relates to the director, as Hamaguchi will be taking over from Nomura. Nomura will instead now take up the role of creative director, overseeing the Final Fantasy VII Remake project as a whole, as opposed to being in the trenches with any specific entry. Within this role, he will, for example, also be overseeing the production of games like Ever Crisis and whatever else they're cooking behind the scenes. Now, it's unclear when this change actually took place in the literal sense, as we do know that initial planning for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was already underway as early as 2019, but we do know that Hamaguchi was an influential member of the team, and throughout much of the post-release press activities, he often joined Kitase as a representative for the development team. In terms of the actual production, here's where things start to get more interesting. Even though we knew the Final Fantasy VII Remake would be a multi-part series, for some time it was unclear how many parts there would actually be. In the immediate aftermath after the release of the Final Fantasy VII Remake, Tetsuya Nomura shared that he would prefer there be more parts. His main reason for this was connection with the fans, as he felt they would be more satisfied if there was less time to wait between each part. However, the only way to achieve this would be to release more parts that were shorter in length and had reduced scope. Kitase, as the ultimate decision maker, did not agree though. Nomura later revealed to Japanese publication 4Gamer that due to there being concerns about development costs and profit margins, Kitase had asked him to explore how the Final Fantasy VII Remake project could be concluded with as few parts as possible. This even saw them explore how the remake project could feasibly be concluded within just 2 parts. However, these plans wouldn't end up being necessary due to when the Final Fantasy VII Remake released. Quite often, once a project concludes, while core members of the team will stay together, other members will often move on to new projects. But as the entire world was in flux, that didn't happen. Kitase shared that upon release, most of the team were given time off to recuperate and deal with the situation they were facing. The team also had to get used to remote working, so moving on to new projects just wasn't viable. When they returned, some members of the team were assigned to work on the PC version of Remake, while others were assigned to work on Intergrade, Episode Intermission, or planning out Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Due to them taking this approach, the crucial aspect was that the majority of the team continued working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake project in some shape or form. There were very few members of the team who either left or moved away, and this also meant they wouldn't need to bring in a load of new hires to plug the gaps. Once those 3 projects then concluded, each respective team was assigned back to work on Rebirth. But instead of acting as new team members who would need to learn tools and get used to the new working environment, they were all well-oiled and were ready to hit the ground running. It means that even though Rebirth only entered into full production shortly after the release of Intergrade, it's due to release approximately just 2.5 years later in the winter 2023 period. Not only that, but the development team have also stressed that the volume of content featured within Rebirth will be significant. So far we don't know how significant it will be, but there have been plenty of hints, and some of the biggest hints were delivered through the trailer that was published last summer as part of the Final Fantasy VII 25th Anniversary Celebration event. The trailer, which served as a huge tease, was composed of in-game screenshots and pre-rendered cutscenes that were interspersed with abstract questions about the fate of the planet, the future, and Sephiroth's goals. It had a heavy focus on Cloud, Aerith, Zack, and Sephiroth, with no other playable characters featuring, and it showed that the iconic Nibelheim incident from the original game would be playable, possibly from Sephiroth's vantage point. Speaking with Famitsu in July 2022, just after the release of the trailer, Nomura and Kitase acted coy concerning that last point, stating that they were unable to elaborate on whether or not Sephiroth would indeed be playable. They also hinted heavily that we will indeed be able to play out Cloud's flashback, likely during the party's time in the town of Calm, and that the section will be heavily expanded upon in terms of what the player can experience when compared to the original game. And that brings us back to the topic of scope. Due to the PlayStation 5's increased horsepower, the scope of what the developers can bring to the player has expanded, allowing for large, open, explorable maps in a way that just wasn't possible within Remake. Fans of the original game, concerned that this new direction will come at the cost of some key locales being omitted or glossed over, can also rest easy. Discussing this topic in an interview with Japanese magazine Dengeki, Kitase explained, "I can't reveal the specific scope of the story, but there are no major events from the original version that are missing from the entire story. However, in Rebirth, you will not necessarily visit the locations that appeared in the original version in the exact same order. Some locations are visited in a different order." This is pretty in line with what the development team have been saying for years, mainly that the story of the Remake's project will differ from what fans remember, all while staying more or less true to the major plot points of the original game. For example, we know from the release of the prequel novel, Final Fantasy VII Remake Trace of Two Pasts, that the party will still sneak aboard the cargo ship at Junon and head for Costa del Sol, so we can assume that the events after Midgar, mainly Calm, Chocobo Bill's farm, the Midgar Zolom, and the Mithril Mine, also likely occur in that order. But it's unclear whether or not we'll see more events at Fort Condor or some detours to new locations that are introduced. Speaking about how familiar events would play out, Kitase stated that while it was not their intention to deviate too wildly from the story beats of the original game, the team still wanted to surprise players who are familiar with the original game, underlying the very idea that this new compilation is a reimagining of the classic story. This begs the question though, if the team working on the game are willing to shift around the order of events, what other changes can we expect from Rebirth? And in that regard, we know that there will be a heavy emphasis on the role of Zack Fair. Addressing this in the same Famitsu interview, Nomura and Kitase explain that Zack will have a key role to play in the next game. However, they stopped short of saying how or why, and Nomura even made a point of saying that the events of Crisis Core, as seen within the original game and within Crisis Core Reunion, will be consistent with both the original version of Final Fantasy VII and what's being shown within the Remake project. He noted, "Chronologically, the story of Crisis Core is a prequel to Final Fantasy VII, but we also made sure that it will reunite and connect with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth." Expanding further on this notion, Nomura said this to 4Gamer, "For the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, if you play through it to the end, you will see a mystery unravel before you. We do not plan to change the past, and on the same note, we do not want to modify or add anything to Crisis Core Reunion because history has not been changed." Based on this, it's clear that somehow the events of Crisis Core will be canon to both the events of the original timeline and whatever is still to happen within VII Rebirth and beyond. But as for how, or why, right now we have no clue. It's clear though that there's going to be more than meets the eye, and Motomo Toriyama, who was the co-director of Final Fantasy VII Remake, responsible for the narrative, has hinted as such. When referencing Jessie, it led to Toriyama saying things like, "Jessie is not shown in the ending because we couldn't save her," or "that's just what you might think," and perhaps Jessie might also be spared, or perhaps not. Based on this, it feels like he's alluding to the fact that the timeline of the remake compilation may be separate from the one of the original game. One thing featured in the remake that does not seem likely to return though, at least not in the same vein, is the Whispers. They heavily influence the flow of Remake's events, appearing every time something seemed to be playing out a little bit differently from the player might have remembered. This meant they acted as kind of a meta-narrative on the expectations fans had for the remake, but as Toriyama noted in an excerpt from a series of blog articles Square Enix were producing, from here on in, the Whispers cannot act to maintain the destined timeline, so fans can look forward to seeing what kind of future awaits them. But what kind of future will that be? At this point, it's very difficult to say. So focusing back on what we do know, it's a good time to switch to gameplay. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's gameplay is set to build on the established gameplay systems from Remake. This means we'll see more materia added, as well as new mechanics layered over, some of which we're seeing within episode Intermission via Sonon. We can also expect to see a new array of summons added, and when combined with returning elements, this means the gameplay system should start to become even more intricate. One of the big challenges they had in this regard was figuring out what to hold back. As noted by Teruki Endo, the battle director, one of the struggles they had was figuring out which monsters should feature within Remake, and they ultimately decided to bring some things forward so it would be a stronger entry. It means in future installments, they may even start to introduce new elements to plug the gaps. Endo also noted that even though he was responsible for the battle system with Remake, he also wants to contribute much more for Rebirth, and if allowed, he wants to push into working on wider game design elements that affect aspects beyond just the battle system. Given the degree of Endo, who, as mentioned earlier, was a huge contributor to the success of Monster Hunter World, this is incredibly exciting to hear. In terms of developing gameplay, however, it's been confirmed that Red 13 and Yuffie will be returning as playable party members, but beyond that, there's also speculation that Sid Highwind and Vincent Valentine will appear, although they may not necessarily be playable. In the case of Sid Highwind, back in May 2022, the Japanese motion capture actor for Cloud posed for a picture with two other actors. No other context was added, but it has been suggested that the other motion capture actors were recording for Barrett and Sid. In the case of Barrett, the actor on the right was holding his arm, while the actor on the left was striking a pose very similar to one often used by Sid Highwind. Vincent Valentine has also come up in conversation after a fan asked Steve Blum whether he would be reprising his role. In response, Steve said, "They recast us all, sorry." While this means Steve Blum will not be reprising the role of Vincent Valentine, it does suggest another actor has already been cast. And in that regard, with the game due out in winter 2023, we should start to hear more detailed information soon. But as for how soon, well, that's hard to tell. At the moment, Square Enix are putting all of their efforts into promoting Final Fantasy XVI, as that's due to release on the 22nd of June. But during Famitsu's end-of-year 2022 creator interview issue, Kitase had this to say. As the 25th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII continues to stir up excitement within its 7 campaigns, I hope to be able to deliver an update on VII Rebirth when the timing is right. Please look forward to it. For our money, we'd figure that we'll likely hear something about VII Remake closer to or after the release of 16, and the anomaly here is E3. In the build-up to this VII Remake, Square Enix were heavily reliant on E3 to deliver their vision for the game. It saw an awesome trailer released, and Kitase did a lengthy on-screen presentation talking about the various mechanics and walking players around the world through some of the early stages. This was then coupled with a demo that was available for people to play on the show floor. The interesting element is that E3 as a show and a concept has struggled ever since then, and major publishers have pulled their support for the 2023 event. Based on that, Square Enix may choose to take matters more into their own hands or team up more closely with the Summer Games Fest or Sony for a dedicated state of play. Either way, if the planned release window is winter 2023, this hints at either a launch in December 2023 or Q1 2024. And if that's the case, Square Enix will want to start the hype train at least 6 months before launch. And that brings us to our question to all of you. When do you think the VII Rebirth will launch? And do you think Sephiroth will be a playable character, or at least be a supporting character member like Red 13 was within Remake? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this update, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Alright everyone, with that, this is Daryl signing out. I'd like to extend a big thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube membership supporters, especially Benjamin Snow, Chris M. Walker, The Livestream, Elsa Claire Farron, Gaussian D. Kujata, Gregory, Justin Dent, Lord of Morning and Zukan TDK, who are super special Onion Knight supporters, and of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more Final Fantasy goodness.